everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for being on time. My name is Natasha Munasinger. Welcome to another Skills Gap webinar. Just a heads up that we are recording this session because we want to share with sort of the network after we complete our 30-minute lunch and learn. So in terms of how we're going to kick off, as normal, we're going to do a little bit of an introduction on PowerPoint, and then I'm going to introduce our speaker for today, Beverley Head. The topic is all about the gig economy and freelancing, which is also very, very topical. And we want to keep the conversation very informal. So if you have any questions, definitely throw it our way. So in terms of a quick introduction for anyone that I'm meeting for the first time, my name is Natasha Munasinger. The company I'm part of is Frank, and we're an education and training company. And our job, and sort of we live and breathe in terms of preparing graduates for the future of work, to make sure they have the skill set, the mindset, to make them really employable and thrive in the workplace. And we're seeing in terms of COVID, that future of work is really looking different, whether it's within a corporate environment, within an organization, or within graduates really creating a portfolio of skills and becoming a freelance, which is kind of what we're going to focus on today. I really am very excited to chat to Beverley Head, who's a freelance writer and consultant. She's an experienced freelancer who's been doing it for a while now, so we definitely want to dig into her expertise and understanding how she's kind of made it work for herself. She's been a business journalist since the 1980s, from London all the way to Sydney. And now she is a freelance communications consultant, really focusing on business and technology. She started off in a different field, which I'm going to come to you, Bev, to find out more about. Studying the science of materials at Oxford University, and then transitioning into journalism, which I think will be a really interesting story to find out how you got there. In terms of an agenda, it is about the gig economy and freelancing. We're going to focus the most of that webinar time on that. But at the end, I also want to chat to you a little bit about the program. If you're in New South Wales, called Interchange, which is an extracurricular program we're running with New South Wales students at universities and TAFE. So if you're from one of those institutions, or you're a student or a staff member, and you're kind of interested in that, we kick off fairly quickly. But I can tell you a little bit about it by the end of the session. Just also in terms of for the students, this is really focused on graduates and students for this session. For any student that's attending, you get a certificate of attendance after the webinar, which you can use for leadership, extracurricular points, if you have particular programs within your university. So we'll share that link with you. If you have any questions on that, you can always email us. So I know we are all masters at Zoom, but please, whilst I have questions for Bev, it's much more interesting for me to hear from you around your questions. So please send them through on chat. As you're all doing, mic on mute. It's lovely to see humans as we're speaking, so feel free to put your video on if you're comfortable. And of course, we're going to be recording the session. So let me now take the PowerPoint down. And Bev, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure.
So I gave a little bit of a bio as to who you are, but talk us through a little bit about your career journey and sort of how you've landed to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was born and bred in the north of England, and then went south for university. As you mentioned, Natasha, I went to Oxford University and studied metallurgy and the science of materials. Back in I graduated in the 1980s and into what was then Thatcher's Britain, and it was very hard to get a job in my chosen field. So through one course of action I thought was to try to get a job. I'd done some writing at university, and I thought, well, it might be interesting to get into technology journalism, and was fortunate to get in pretty much on the ground floor in the 1980s. I'll date myself. The first publication I wrote for was called Mini Computer News, so that really dates me. And found that I had an aptitude for it. It was a fast-moving area, and there were great opportunities for a young graduate. So that's how I became a journalist, and I worked as a technology journalist in England for 3 years, and then was offered a position in Australia, and thought, well, I'll have an adventure and I'll come here for 12 months. And here I am 30 something years later, and carved out a career first with a publication called Computer World Australia, and then I went on to work for the Financial Review as the technology editor. And then at the very end of my sort of permanent employment with the Financial Review, I was the features editor. And then I went freelance.
And what was the transition from going into freelancing, from sort of working within a corporate environment? How did that happen?
Well, it was a circumstance. We had two young children, one of whom at that stage had health problems, and it was very difficult to work full time going into the office and having to navigate all the health requirements. So we decided, my partner and I decided, that I would go freelance and he would continue to work full time. So it was something that was not necessarily as planned as it might be for other people's careers. But once I had made that plunge, I actually found that I loved the freelance life, and it worked for me and indeed for my family.
So more necessity initially at first anyway.
Initially.
Yeah. And so what is the freelance life, like? What is the average day look like?
There's no average day. I mean, okay. That is the first thing to know. There is no average day, and there's no average month, there's no average week. And what you have to get used to is this concept of feast and famine. Some days you feel that you will never find work again, and on other days you think you'll never meet all the deadlines you have, and you just have to learn to roll with the punches. And it's really important, I think, as a freelancer, to ensure that you have multiple clients with different deadlines and different requirements. It can be very nerve-wracking at the start. You need that combination of bread and butter income, intellectual stimulation, and also work that polishes your byline or your brand. And you need all three of those to really build a successful freelance economy. Your own freelance economy. And you also need to remember, as a gig worker or a freelancer, you are only ever as good as your last piece of work. You can't rest on your laurels. You have to be prepared to put yourself out there and change regularly. As to the average day, just don't expect one. I've been known on a number of occasions to get up at 4 a.m. to really hit those deadlines that I have, because I can't work at night. My brain doesn't function that way. So, and other times you'll have a day that you'll have a very light workload. So it is that ebb and flow that you have to get comfortable with, but not too comfortable.
I mean, how did you get comfortable in terms of just mindset around the change and instability or the flow? How did you sort of come to terms with it? It's a process? Is it just doing it for a few years and getting used to it, knowing that you came through it all, so you can trust that things will work out?
Yeah, I think one of the best pieces of advice I followed was something when I was the technology editor of the Financial Review. IBM always had a saying for its salespeople: don't have anybody worth more than 10% of your income. Because if you have multiple clients and one stops using you, you still have 90% of your income. Now, at the very beginning, I did go for that. I aimed to go for that, having 10 clients or more with nobody at more than 10%. As you become more of a known quantity with your clients, you can shift that. And in fact, towards the very end of my career, I've just recently retired, having turned 60. And I had a couple of clients that were pretty much 90% of my income. But at that very start, I was very mindful of having a diversity of work. And I built up consulting work in adjacent industries, so that if one was going through a bit of a quiet period, maybe the other one would pick up the slack. And that seemed to work very well. Having had a specialty, that was really helpful. Having developed a reputation and a specialty as a technology journalist, when I did go freelance, there was quite a bit of work that came my way. The trick is to have those networks in place. And one of the other really useful things that I think helped me, and I recommend anybody who's thinking of this does, is you don't just network up. You network down and you network across. And the reason I say that is you never know who's coming up and who will overtake you. Obviously, your clients are likely to be above you, so you need those networks because they're going to feed you the work. But the sideways networking is really useful because there'll be times when you're swamped with work and you need to offload something to keep a client happy. So I always had a number of people that if I couldn't take something on, I felt very comfortable referring that work to them and vice versa. So quite often I would get a call from somebody who'd say, look, I've got this job. Normally I'd take it on. I'm a bit busy. Have you got the capacity? And so you develop that informal network that allows you to share work with trusted colleagues and networks. That's the trick. You need that those people who are on the same level as you to be highly trusted, because you don't want to ruin any of your client connections by offering them somebody who, yes, may do the work, but not of the quality that they're used to.
So yes, so two very useful tips there, Bev, in terms of building a trusted net of contacts that you can sort of share workload with if needed. And also this idea of the 10%, making sure you're not top heavy with one client. So God forbid they don't give you any work that really jeopardizes income streams and things like that. So awesome. So in terms of the gig economy, I know you mentioned that. I know that you were in that technology space. What are some trends maybe you're seeing in the space of gig economy, just from your work and your observations?
I think one of the things that gig workers have to be really aware of is you have to look after yourself. Nobody's going to look after you. We may have seen the recent situation where the food delivery driver got a compensation package, but that's going to be few and far between. You have to ensure that you are earning sufficient money to meet yours and your needs. There is a lot of pressure on people to accept lower rates, and I would really advocate that people try to avoid that at all costs, unless you really want to forge a relationship and then feel that at some stage in the future you'd be able to increase the rates you are getting. You also need to be aware of things with the gig economy of, I'm at the tail end of my career, but for people starting out, superannuation. When you're 20, when you're 30, turning 60 is a long way away. When you're 60, it's 2 minutes since you were 25. And you're going to have to do that yourself because you need to carve out those things for your future. You're going to have to do all your technology and those sorts of things. So, these are the sorts of things that I think you need to be aware of. And you also need to set your business up properly. From day one, with your ABN, not necessarily as a sole trade, not necessarily as a company. It might not be financially sensible to be a company, but as a sole trader, and also to do things like get your GST, register for GST. Now, obviously, you're not going to have to pay GST if you're earning under $75,000 a year. But if you don't charge GST on everything you earn from day one, all your clients know you're not earning 75,000, and you will find yourself pushed down, and they will push the rates. Whereas if you charge GST from day one, people assume that you are earning over 75,000, and it's a bit of extra paperwork at the beginning, but soon enough you will be earning over 75,000 very quickly if you're any good. And so getting those sorts of things in place is really important, I think.
So for anyone looking into becoming a freelancer, apart from the checklist of things they need to be thinking about, tax, super, any other skills, what do they really need to get started?
First of all, work out how much you need to earn, and then work backwards from that to get your rates. Don't be reliant on one client or one type of work. Find the opportunity to diversify, look for opportunities adjacent, look the part. it's very easy when I have friends who are also freelancers, and it's very easy to settle into the, tracky dacks and scrappy t-shirt look. But you'll suddenly get the opportunity for an interview. And, I find if I get up and I've sort of changed into something at least reasonably presentable, if those opportunities arrive, A, I feel more like working, and B, you can instantly take on those instant opportunities. The other thing I would really recommend, and it seems very prosaic, invest in a good chair. It really doesn't matter if you're sitting at your kitchen table, but if you're sitting at your kitchen chair, you are going, and for 8 hours a day, sometimes writing stuff or working, doing interviews, a good chair is a really great investment, and you can, write it off on your tax. So it seems very, very prosaic, but as you get older, you'll thank me for that piece of advice, I assure you. Invest in your, people need to invest in their technology. You need reasonable technology, good internet speeds, a backup in the fact of, being able to hotspot your phone if your home connection goes down and that sort of thing. And ideally a second computer, one that you can, go on the road with when you need to, but also if, God forbid, you get the blue screen of death, you've got that, you're never lost with, without access to technology. And backup everything. Other things I think people need to know, it's invoicing. It sounds really, really simple, but I have friends who forget to issue invoices. I never forget to issue an invoice. The minute that piece of work is finished, get that invoice out there, and then instill in yourself good financial hygiene. So you're getting in touch with them after 14 days, gentle reminder. You're getting in touch with them after 30 days, time to pay up, etc., and keep on that, because you really need that cash flow. And it's useful to be able to have a second bank account, even, where you put the money that you're going to need to pay when it comes to your business activity statement or paying your GST. So you're not racing around, robbing Peter to pay Paul when it comes time to pay the tax. And I think the final thing that people do forget, you have to engineer some work-life balance. It's really easy as a freelancer to be always on call. Now, that balance might be that you choose to go and have your hair cut on a Wednesday afternoon when it's quiet, and then do an extra 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon or something. But do engineer that. Don't fall into the trap of working each and every day.
And do you just, so I had two questions. The first was, how do you set your weekly schedule? Do you have something? I know you said there's no average day, but do you say, look, these are my working times, this is when I'm going to be available, or is it more ad hoc depending on what comes through?
It can be reasonably ad hoc. I mean, if you've got international interviews and so forth, you have to be flexible. And I think I am fairly flexible, but I'm also not silly flexible. And, and there are times at which I just say, and I might not tell the client why. I say, I'm terribly sorry, not available at that time. And I quite like to do that, because as well it indicates to them that they're not the only game in town. So they're not thinking that you're on a string and every time they yank your collar you're going to come racing. So I do, and I also engineer time in the diary to do specific tasks and block time out for reading or planning or things like that, so that you've got that time available to you. And then I would rarely work past 6 of an evening, very, very rarely, but I would occasionally get up terribly early to do things. But yes, I would block time out. That was the way I used to do it. And I also kept sort of running sheets of when deadlines were due. I mean, the one thing as a freelancer, don't miss a deadline.
And did you take international clients at all, Bev?
I beg your pardon? International clients? Yeah.
How'd you work the time zones?
Look, a lot of stuff, you've got to be flexible. So if you're in the worst really is New York. That's always a tough one to sort of organize the calls, but West Coast of America was fine. And I used to find that clients who were in Europe were pretty good, and in Asia, of course, it was never a problem. It was only a couple of hours, so that was always you could always find a workaround with that. And of course, Zoom made life much easier for everybody.
I mean, we've talked about the steps to do. What's the payoff? I know yours came out of necessity in the beginning, but what's the good stuff?
The really good stuff is you're in charge of your own destiny. You can, after a while, start to choose your clients. You know, I had excuse the French, no dickhead policy. You know, you don't have to work for poisonous people, and I didn't. And I was master of my own destiny. You know, if I wanted to go into different areas, I could. I mean, besides being a technology journalist, I worked as in media training. I used to chair conferences for various people. I did quite a lot of work consulting to law firms on communication strategies and things like that. So it was all very interesting, very intellectually stimulating. And I thoroughly enjoyed the life that I had. I worked from home. I had that flexibility. I mean, my kids, when they were little, they're grown up now, but, you know, it was very funny. They knew that when they came in through the front door from school, they were very quiet in case mum was on the phone. And then when, you know, when my husband retired before them, he'd sort of barrel in the front door and, hello, I'm home. And I had to train him. So it was a fantastically flexible way to be as a working parent, but caution, working from home as a freelancer does not equate to childcare. You can't do the two. So don't think that by working from home as a freelancer, you're going to be able to do the childcare thing as well. You can't, but your juggling ability is much better. You will be able to put a casserole on in the middle of the day and bring the washing in when it starts to rain. And those are huge benefits, really.
What are some things maybe you've seen? I mean, for those free, you know, perhaps students or those just starting, maybe thinking of freelancing, how do you build that initial experience or credibility to actually start getting the first few clients? You know, because that tends to be one of the harder times, right?
It is very hard. And you know, when I was at the Fin Review, there were some fantastic reporters who would literally cold call me with stories and say, you know, I've got this story, would you be interested in it? And yes, I was. And a couple of them went on to be, you know, very well-known reporters, and one built a very significant business. So you have to be prepared to put yourself out there. It's harder to forge those networks as a young graduate. You know, I was lucky I had those networks when I did go freelance. It's not impossible, but it is harder. I think what's trickier is to be your own manager and to be your own editor, because every piece of work that you put out there, you want to be of a significant quality, and you have to be able to step back and look at that piece of work and think, is that what I want to be going out there with my name on it? And I think that's very hard for a younger person to have that prism of viewing your work with you know, quite a robust eye, I would say. You know, you can, yeah, I think that sort of sums it up, really.
For someone that maybe can't do the quality control because they're just getting started themselves, is that where the role of maybe a mentor or something like that
Absolutely
comes into play?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I had a couple of people that I would trust if I, you know, if something was not working, I could ring them and say, you know, can you just read this? Can you, what's your thoughts on this? And having those mentors or colleagues on the same level that you feel very comfortable with, who would be prepared to tell you in no uncertain terms that, you know, this needs some work, or have you thought about this? Because when you're working on your own, you don't have a sounding board. And that's really important. And if you can develop a good relationship with a mentor or a colleague who's on the same wavelength as you, you know, those sorts of horizontal connections that I was talking about before, that's really, really helpful to be able to have those people to bounce ideas off or your concerns.
There's something in the business world that's maybe taken off a little bit, is around having this informal board of advisors where you can sort of sound, bounce ideas off. They can guide you. Even it's not for a company, it's just for you as an entity.
Yeah,
so maybe something right. Like that. JD Otto, so any advice on preventing a job costing more of your time and money than what you're getting paid for?
Yeah, the magic of that. Sometimes you can't. If you are excuse me, if you are trying to build a rapport with a client at the early days, sometimes you have to invest more time than you are getting paid for. So it depends on the work. But what I always used to do with jobs, very often you'd get a job would come up and you weren't sure how long it was going to take, or and what I used to offer the clients was the option of either they paid me on a per word basis. So they wanted 1,000 words, they paid X amounts of dollars, or they paid me an hourly rate. And I always said I would charge them the lower of the two. Now, the other thing is you have to work out how deep you want to go with any particular story or piece of work you're doing. And it's not a case of, you know, what is good enough. It's really easy when you're on your own to become absolutely fixated on a piece of work and spend hours and hours and hours and hours doing something, when really you want that very much more high level piece of work. So you have to be very clear on who the audience is, who the client is, and how much you can be prepared to invest in it. It is a balancing act, and it can be really tricky to navigate, JD. But it's important to get that balance right as much as you can and not overinvest. That said, one of the things for quality control is when you have finished a piece of work, what I like to do is I like to finish it the day before the deadline. And then on the morning of when it's due, I just like to think, what can I add? What piece of research can I quickly add to this to just give it that next level of oomph and benefit? So the trick is to know your audience, know your client, know how much you're prepared to invest in this, and not to get sucked down those rabbit holes. Otherwise, you can spend hours and hours and hours and hours on something that's a 400-word piece. So you have to be really clear on what you're doing, but it is tricky.
So just if I understand you correctly, Beverley, for those that are maybe in journalism but also outside, is perhaps have different ways of charging. So whether it's a retainer or whether it's a project cost or an hourly cost.
Exactly.
But also be aware.
Oh, we've frozen.
Bring up my share screen again.
Oh, there you go. I can see you're back now. I'm not sure. Yeah.
I was just sort of summarizing, Bev, on there's the different ways of maybe charging for clients, but also thinking about scope of work and not getting too invested too much if it's not needed. Because that might cost something else. So as always, that brings us very to the end. Those 30 minutes always flies so quickly. So Beverley, I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for bringing us into your world of freelancing. We've got another question. Any advice on preventing? Oh, no, JD just says thanks. For those that maybe are in New South Wales, Sydney, interchange-newsouthwales.com use as a multidisciplinary hackathon type event we're running for university and TAFE students. If you're in any of those institutions or you know someone who is, definitely get in touch with us, and we'd love to it's only open for students at this stage. I just want to give that a bit of a prop. So it's coming up on the 8th of July Felicity also said, thanks, Beverly. And she says an interesting viewpoint on GST. And I think what she was referencing was the idea that maybe perhaps if you don't charge it, people automatically think you're a small fry, and then, maybe bargain down your rates. So that was a really good point. The final thing is, everyone, if you want to get a certificate of participation for this event, Christine just put the link on Zoom chat. So this will help you get some points if you're at an institution or a university. All right, Beverly, thank you so much for the Lunch and Learn for our Skills Gap webinar. Thank you for joining us. And for those, I suppose, that want to know more about you, I'm sure they might connect with you on LinkedIn, just giving you a heads up. Sometimes that happens. But we also wish you the very best in retirement. I hope you have a great time there in the South Coast.
Thank you very much indeed, Natasha, and good luck to everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.